My wife texted stuck late at work, love you. She didn't know I was already in the same restaurant 2 tables away watching her kiss another man like our 27 years meant nothing. I remember staring at the glow of my phone while her laugh floated across the room. It used to be my favorite sound. That night it felt like somebody dragging a fork across a plate sharp and ugly. She leaned in toward him in that little corner booth, her hand on his forearm, his white coat folded over the seat beside him. Then she kissed him slow and comfortable, like it wasn't the first time, and she wasn't wearing my wedding ring. My name is Tom Granger. I'm 54 years old, born and raised in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I work HVAC. I fix other people's air when it's too hot and their heat when it's 10 below, and the wind off the river cuts through every crack in their windows. My life was simple, predictable, and I thought solid. For 27 years, I've been married to Linda. Sunday mornings were always the same, her in the kitchen at 6:30, brewing Folgers and that old Mr. Coffee we got as a wedding gift. Me at the table with the Cedar Rapids Gazette, pretending to read the headlines while I really just checked the sports and the weather. We'd head to St. Mark's for the 9 o'clock service, sit 3 pews from the back, and nod at the same faces we'd been nodding at for decades. Fridays, I went down to VFW Post 788 for poker. We'd play for nickels and quarters, talk about old layoffs, busted knees, kids moving away and whose furnace just went out. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. 27 years wasn't a mistake. It was a life. It was mornings with black coffee and the Gazette Sundays at St. Mark's praying for our quiet blessings, and Fridays at the VFW where I'd bluff my way through poker like I bluffed my way through life's little leaks. That's the life I thought I still had the night she sent that text. It was a Tuesday in late January, the kind of Iowa cold that stings your nose the second you step outside. I'd spent the day in and out of basements, crawling around old ductwork in houses that still smelled like cigarette smoke from the 80s. By 5:30, I was beat. I called Linda on my way back into town. Hey, you want to grab dinner somewhere, I asked. I'm not in the mood to cook, and I sure as heck don't feel like washing dishes. Her voice came over the limelight, but a little rushed. I wish, honey. We're slammed tonight. Dr. Keller's running behind. I'll probably be stuck late at work. Love you. She said love you like she always did, automatic and warm. I didn't think twice. I just said, all right, don't work too hard, and hung up. Traffic on First Avenue was backed up because somebody couldn't figure out a left turn in the snow, so I ended up taking the long way around. I was hungry and tired and didn't want fast food out of a paper bag. Old Mill's Steakhouse sat there on the corner, big windows glowing warm against the dark. It's where Linda and I went for our 10th anniversary, when we still dressed up for things. I pulled in without thinking much about it. Inside it smelled like grilled meat and baked potatoes drowning in butter. The hostess, a college kid with a nose ring, smiled. Just one tonight. Yeah, just me, I said, and it sounded strange coming out of my mouth. She sat me near the window. I took off my Carhartt, draped it over the back of the chair, and let my bones thaw out. I ordered a ribeye and a Coke. My phone buzzed once with some junk email. I checked it anyway, more out of habit than interest. That's when I heard it, Linda's laugh. You have to understand, after almost 3 decades, you know that sound. I could have picked it out in a crowded football stadium. I froze the hair on my arms standing up under my flannel. I told myself, don't be stupid. Lots of people laugh like that. Lots of women in this town work in hospitals and wear their hair the way she does. But then I turned my head. There she was in a corner booth, back to the wall like she always preferred. Her hair was pulled up the way she did on long days, little wisps falling around her face. She wasn't in scrubs. She was in that blue blouse she bought for church last Easter. Across from her sat a man I recognized from the hospital, tall, clean cut, still in his white coat, stethoscope hanging around his neck like a prop in a commercial. Dr. Paul Keller. They weren't talking like coworkers grabbing a quick meal. Her hand rested on his forearm, thumb tracing slow circles through his shirt sleeve. He said something, she laughed again, and this time her head tipped back in that way I used to love when it was my stupid joke. My heart didn't just sink. It clenched tight and cold like the January wind had sliced through the windows and straight into my chest. I heard my fork clink against the plate before I realized I dropped it. I could have stood up. I could have marched over, made a scene, thrown a drink, whatever people do in those trashy TV shows. Instead, I sat there and watched my own life tilt sideways. The waitress walked by. You okay, sir? Need anything? I swallowed hard. No, ma'am. I'm fine. My voice sounded 2 sizes too small. I turned my chair just enough that I could see them in the reflection of the window instead of staring straight at them like some creep. I watched him reach across the table, take her hand in both of his. I watched her smile soften into something private and tender. Then she leaned across the table and they kissed. Not a quick peck, not a good night see ya at work kind of thing. Slow, comfortable, practiced, like they'd done it 100 times before, like the ring on her finger was just decoration. For a second, everything went quiet. I didn't hear the clatter of silverware, the country song playing too low over the speakers, the hostess laughing at somebody's joke. All I heard was my own pulse in my ears and the tiny sharp crunch of my own teeth grinding together. My phone was still in my hand from checking that dumb email. I stared down at it at our last string of texts from that afternoon about picking up milk and the dog's vet appointment and whether we had enough salt for the driveway. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was 30 years of swallowing my pride. Maybe it was all those late nights she had to work that suddenly lined up like dots on a map. Maybe I just wanted her to feel even a fraction of the shock that was ripping through me. I opened the camera. My fingers, usually steady from decades of wiring thermostats and tightening leaky ductwork, shook as I lifted the phone. I angled it toward the booth using the reflection in the window to line it up so they wouldn't see. My thumb hovered over the button. For half a second I thought, don't. Just pay your bill and leave. Be the bigger person. Then I heard her laugh again, soft and full for him, not for me. I hit the shutter. The phone made the quiet little sound of a photo being taken, but to me it sounded like the crack of a tree splitting in an ice storm. I opened our message thread. Her last words to me stared back. Stuck late at work, love you. I typed work hard tonight. I attached the photo of her and Keller at the booth, her hand on his arm, his face angled toward hers. My thumb hovered over send. My whole hand was trembling now. I didn't see her face yet. I heard the little ding of her phone across the restaurant. I heard the tiny intake of breath like air hissing out of a punctured tire, our marriage deflating in one small sound. I pressed send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body stiffened. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and glanced at the screen. Even from 2 tables away, I saw the color drain from her cheeks. Her head snapped up, eyes scanning the room. I turned my gaze back to my plate and picked up my fork like nothing in the world was wrong. My steak was getting cold. I didn't wait for her to find me. I laid a 20 on the table, stood up, and slid my arms back into my worn brown Carhartt. The waitress called after me. You want a box for that, sir? No thanks, I said. My voice was steady now. I've had enough. The blast of cold air when I pushed open the door hit me hard, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. I walked across the icy parking lot to my old Ford, fumbled with the keys because my fingers were still shaking, and climbed in. I didn't drive home. I pulled out of the lot and headed down to the river instead, to the little turnout where guys my age go to eat lunch in their trucks and pretend they're alone in the world. I put the truck in park, turned off the engine, and just sat there in the dark cab watching my own breath fog up the windshield. That night I wasn't thinking about revenge or lawyers or who would get the house. I was thinking about how you go from Folgers in the morning and St. Mark's on Sundays to sitting in a cold truck, alone, realizing your wife has a whole different life when she says she's stuck late at work. I was thinking about how to breathe. I didn't sleep the night it happened. I don't think I even tried. I just sat there in my truck by the river until the cold crept from the metal frame into my bones. Around midnight, I finally drove to my brother Mark's place in Marion. He keeps a spare key under a ceramic frog by the porch, same spot since '92. I let myself in, dropped onto his couch, and stared at the ceiling until morning. When Mark found me curled there like an old dog, he didn't ask questions. He just stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep out of his eyes. Tom, he said quietly, tell me you're sick or drunk or anything other than what I'm thinking. I shook my head. He didn't push. He just sighed and started a pot of coffee. I didn't tell him everything right away. Shame is funny, it doesn't hit all at once. It settles in slow, like cold, seeping under a door. I'd spent nearly 3 decades building a life with Linda, and now I was the idiot husband who didn't see the affair happening right in front of him. I didn't want to say it out loud and make it real. But Linda wasn't waiting around in silence. By the time I checked my phone, I had 10 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and a long string of texts. Tom, where are you? Please talk to me. You misunderstood. It wasn't what you think. Please come home. I love you. I didn't respond. Around 8:30, she called again. Mark was at the table buttering toast. He looked at me then, at the buzzing phone, then slid the plate my direction. Eat first, he said, then deal with your mess. But I answered anyway. Her voice was frantic, too high, like she was trying to outrun the truth. Tom, oh, thank God. Please just let me explain. I don't need an explanation, I said. I saw it. You saw what exactly? I laughed, a short, bitter thing that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Linda, don't do that. Silence on her end. Then quietly she tried again. It was just Tom. It was a moment, a goodbye hug that got out of hand. I wasn't thinking clearly. You know how stressful work has been. A hug, I repeated. Is that what you call kissing him? She stumbled over her next words. It wasn't a kiss. It was Tom, you don't understand. We've been through worse together. Remember when you got laid off in '98? We survived that. We can survive this too. I felt my jaw tighten. Don't bring up our history to cover what you're doing now. She started crying, loudly. The kind of crying that's more performance than pain. Please come home, she sobbed. We can fix this. But I didn't come home. Not that day, not the next. I stayed with Mark, sleeping on his couch, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding. I kept seeing that booth, that kiss, the way her hand rested on Keller's arm. I'd roll over and stare at the ceiling, wondering what else I'd missed. By day 3, word had started to ripple through the edges of our community. Cedar Rapids isn't tiny, but people talk, especially around the VFW. That Friday, I went to poker night mostly out of habit. The guys greeted me the same way as always, nods, handshakes, little jokes about the weather, but I could feel something under the surface. Curious glances, concern. Halfway through a hand, one of the nurses who sometimes joined us, Carol, a sharp woman in her 60s, leaned toward me. Tom, she said gently, I'm sorry, but folks at the hospital have noticed things. Between Linda and Keller. My chest tightened. How long, I asked. She hesitated just a second too long. Months. Months. That word hit harder than the kiss, harder than the photo, harder than any lie Linda had thrown at me over the past 3 days. Months meant long nights weren't new. Months meant this wasn't a slip, it was a second life. Months meant I'd been living in a house full of secrets while she reheated my dinners and kissed my cheek goodnight. I walked out of the VFW early, drove around in circles for almost an hour before pulling into the parking lot of a strip mall where my buddy's divorce attorney had an office. His name was Daniel Hart, late 50s, bald, looked like he'd seen every flavor of heartbreak the Midwest could offer. He listened to my story quietly, fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he nodded slowly. I'm sorry you're going through this, he said, but here's what you need to understand. Iowa is an equitable distribution state. That doesn't mean equal, it means fair, and fair is determined by what you can prove. I frowned. The photo isn't enough. Oh, it helps, he said, but without clear evidence of financial misconduct or a long-term affair, she could still walk away with half, maybe more. I stared at him. She cheated. How is that fair? He shrugged, sympathetic but blunt. In this state, adultery doesn't always mean much in court. If you want to protect your house, your retirement, and whatever savings you haven't merged, you're going to need stronger evidence. Something concrete. I felt sick, physically sick. She didn't just betray you emotionally, he went on. If this affair involves shared expenses, hotel stays, gifts, or God forbid changes to financial beneficiaries, then you have leverage. Without that, you're bleeding assets. I rubbed my temples, so she could take half my retirement because I didn't catch her soon enough. Potentially. I left his office feeling like the ground had tilted beneath me a second time. On my way out, something kept nagging me, one of Linda's habits. She left stacks of mail on our dining table all the time. Insurance statements, work forms, little notes she meant to file. That night, I snuck back into the house while I knew she was working her Friday shift. The place felt haunted, too quiet, too clean. I moved around slowly, not wanting to disturb anything. And then I saw it. A stack of HR papers from Mercy Medical Center. Right there under a candle holder she never lit. I flipped through them. Emergency contact updated to Dr. Paul Keller, insurance beneficiary 30% allocated to the same man. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it. But there it was, her handwriting, her signature. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't even just an affair. This was planning. She wasn't just cheating on our marriage bed, she was rewriting our future on paper, preparing a different life with someone else while still sleeping under my roof. My hands shook as I set the papers back exactly where I found them. My mind buzzed with a single sharp truth. This wasn't a betrayal, this was a replacement. A replacement where I had quietly been erased. And standing there in the dim light of my own dining room, something inside me hardened. Not anger, not rage. Resolve. For the first time since that night in the restaurant, I felt my breath steady. If she wanted a new future, she could have it. But she wasn't taking mine with her. I slipped out of the house that night without touching a thing, leaving everything exactly where it was, including the papers that had just changed the entire direction of my life. Driving back to Mark's place, my mind spun in a way it never had before. Not with rage, not with heartbreak, those had already burned through me. What I felt now was something colder, cleaner, steady as an Iowa winter. Resolve. The next morning, Linda called again, and again. She left messages that swung between apologetic, frantic, furious, and pitiful, like she was throwing every emotion at the wall to see which version of herself might get me back. Finally, I picked up. "Tom, honey, where are you? Please, let's talk. I love you." Her voice cracked just enough to sound real to someone who didn't know her. But I'd known her for nearly 3 decades. I knew her sorry I forgot to pay the water bill voice, her please don't tell my mom voice, her I'm about to ask for something expensive voice. This one wasn't real, this one was panic. "I'll come home," I said evenly. She gasped with relief. "Oh, thank God, Tom. We can fix this. We can work through this." "Sure," I said. "We'll talk tonight." I hung up before she could say anything else. Mark stared at me from the kitchen table. "You're going back." "Yeah," I said, slipping on my jacket, "but not for the reason she thinks." He nodded, understanding instantly. Mark's been divorced twice. He knows the difference between reconciliation and reconnaissance. When I walked through the front door of my own house that evening, Linda came rushing down the hallway like she was greeting a soldier returning from war. She wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my chest. For a second, I'll admit it, I almost folded. The familiar smell of her shampoo, the soft tremble in her shoulders, the warmth of a person who'd been beside me for nearly 30 years. It stirred something painful and old. But then I remembered the booth, the kiss, her hand on Keller's arm, her signature next to his name on a document that rewired my life without my consent. Whatever softness had risen in me dissolved like frost under a blowtorch. "I'm tired," I said, stepping out of her embrace. "Long day. Let's talk later." Her face flickered, hurt, hope, guilt, all tangled together. She nodded and forced a small smile. I walked to the spare bedroom and closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, heart hammering. The house felt unfamiliar, like a memory I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. That night, Linda knocked gently on the door. "Tom, I made beef stew, your favorite." Of course she had. I hesitated. For a moment, the familiar smell drifted under the door, rich, warm, comforting. Memories flooded back, birthdays, cold nights after double shifts, the time she made stew for the neighbors when their furnace went out. For a moment, I almost let myself believe she meant it, that the stew was love, that the apology was real. But then I saw her signature on those insurance papers in my mind, looping and confident. I opened the door just enough to take the bowl. "Thanks," I said. Her eyes softened. "Tom, I'm really trying." But I just closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, I whispered to myself, "Trying doesn't erase what you've already done." After dinner, when she showered and went to bed, I got to work. I moved quietly through the house, checking her desk drawers, the mail pile, the closet shelves. I wasn't rifling or digging, that would have left a trail. I was simply looking where she'd always left things lying around. And she didn't disappoint. Old hotel confirmations, receipts from restaurants in Des Moines, a pair of gold earrings still in the box from a store I certainly didn't buy anything from, a printout of her work schedule showing days she had supposedly picked up double shifts, except I now had receipts proving she'd been nowhere near the hospital. At midnight, when the house was silent, I cracked open her laptop. I waited for the password prompt, fully expecting another wall to climb. But she'd never changed the password. She used the same one she'd had since 2009, our dog's name. I let out a humorless chuckle. Of course, I whispered. Inside her email, things lined up too neatly. Confirmation emails, deleted messages that weren't truly deleted, receipts, one reservation to a bed and breakfast in Galena that made my stomach twist. I forwarded everything to a new private email account I'd created. Then I deleted the forwarding history and closed the laptop quietly. The whole time, my heart thudded like I was breaking into someone else's house, even though this was my house, my wife, my life. But the betrayal had warped everything, made me feel like a trespasser in my own story. 2 days later, she floated into the kitchen with a giddy smile, humming like she hadn't detonated our marriage. "Good morning," she chirped. "Guess what? They're having a promotion dinner next month. They're considering me for office administrator." I stopped mid-sip of my coffee. "Are they?" I said quietly. She nodded eagerly, twisting her hair like a teenager. "It's a big night. Keller will be there too. He's presenting on patient care, but he won't sit with me, obviously. I want everything to look normal." Normal. She said it like the word still meant anything. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, you deserve to be there." She flushed, touched. "Thank you, Tom, really." But what I felt then wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. A public event, supervisors, hospital leadership, HR staff, witnesses, a stage built entirely around the theme of integrity. A perfect place for the truth. That afternoon, I visited Attorney Daniel again. I brought him a folder neatly organized, labeled time-stamped. He leafed through everything with raised eyebrows. "Well," he said, sitting back, "you've been busy." "I had help," I said, "my memory." He nodded approvingly. "With all this, Tom, you're not just protecting your assets, you're taking control." I left his office with a plan, a folder, and a strange calmness settling inside me. A quiet strength I hadn't felt in weeks. That night, while Linda reheated leftovers and talked about new shoes she wanted for the promotion dinner, I cut a manila folder to fit snugly inside my jacket. Inside were copies of everything I needed: proof, patterns, signatures, dates, receipts, photographs. And as I slipped the folder into place, I whispered to myself, "You wanted integrity, Linda. Let's show them what it really looks like." The night of the promotion dinner arrived with the kind of cold that sneaks under your collar and settles between your shoulder blades. February in Iowa doesn't care what your personal life looks like. It freezes you the same whether you're a sinner or a saint. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Clean pair of jeans, my nicest flannel, the dark jacket that still held the faint scent of furnace dust. I shaved, trimmed the edges of my beard, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look broken anymore. I didn't look lost. I looked like a man who finally understood he didn't need to shout to be heard. The manila folder slid neatly inside my coat, not thick but heavy with the weight of truth. Linda, meanwhile, floated around the bedroom like a woman preparing for her coronation. She curled her hair, brushed it out, redid it twice. She sprayed perfume she saved for important events. She stepped into a navy blue dress I hadn't seen in years, one that shimmered just enough under the light. When she walked into the hallway and saw me at the bottom of the stairs, she offered a soft smile. "You look nice," she said. "So do you." And she did beautiful even. But beauty doesn't hide intent. Beauty doesn't erase betrayal. It just makes the contrast sharper. She drove us to the Cedar Rapids Country Club, her fingers lightly tapping the steering wheel, humming some pop song from the radio. Every now and then she glanced at me hopeful, as if the last month had been smoothed over with one good stew and a few bedtime apologies. Inside the building was warm, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat and garlic butter. Tables were draped in white linens, wine glasses gleaming under soft lights. Doctors, nurses, and administrators milled around in small groups, laughing politely, shaking hands. Linda stood taller as people noticed her, complimented her dress, mentioned they'd heard great things about her work. She glowed under their attention. "Just stay close," she whispered to me. "And please, just act normal." Normal, that word again. "Of course," I said. The chatter swelled as more people arrived. I walked with her to a table near the front reserved for staff nominees and their guests. I took my seat, hung my jacket behind the chair, and rested my hands lightly on the table. From across the room, Dr. Keller entered. He looked polished, rehearsed, confident. The kind of confident that comes from a man who believes consequences don't apply to him. He scanned the room, saw Linda, and his eyes flicked to me just for a second, but it was enough. He looked away quickly, adjusting his tie. Linda's breath caught. Please, she whispered, don't start anything. I won't, I said, and I meant it. The point of truth is that it doesn't need volume. It just needs timing. Dinner began with the usual speeches thanking staff for their dedication, acknowledging years of service, pointing out improvements in patient satisfaction. Polite applause followed each announcement. Then the lights dimmed slightly as the hospital director walked onto the small platform at the front. Tonight, he said warmly, we highlight the core values of Mercy Medical Center: respect, compassion, and above all, integrity. The word hung in the air like frost. Linda straightened proudly beside me. Tonight, we consider candidates for office administrator. This role demands trustworthiness, leadership, and a commitment to the values we hold dear. Linda's smile widened. And now the director continued, we'll invite one of our physicians, Dr. Paul Keller, to speak about the role of integrity in patient care. Keller rose from his table, smoothing his jacket, and walked toward the podium. He flashed a tight smile toward the audience. Thank you, he began. Integrity is... I stood up. Not abruptly, not angrily, just stood. People noticed. Conversations paused. Linda's hand clamped onto my wrist. Tom, she whispered sharply, what are you doing? I gently eased my hand free and walked up the aisle. Slow, calm, every step measured. Keller's words faltered as he saw me approaching. I didn't go to the podium. I didn't go to Keller. I went to the HR director sitting near the front, Mr. Bradley, a meticulous man in his 60s who handled more hospital scandals than he cared to admit. He looked up at me, puzzled. I reached into my jacket. The room tensed, the quiet kind of tension when people sense someone's life is about to split open. I set the manila folder on the table in front of him. For your due diligence on integrity, I said quietly, start on page 1. No anger, no accusation, just truth perfectly placed. The HR director blinked, adjusted his glasses, and opened the folder. The first page was the photo from the restaurant, Linda and Keller in that booth, her hand on his arm, their faces too close to be misinterpreted. Gasps rippled through the room. The second page showed hotel receipts, the third credit card statements, the fourth a beneficiary form with Keller's name written in Linda's careful handwriting. Mr. Bradley's face hardened with each page. Keller stumbled back from the podium. This isn't Tom, come on, this isn't what it looks like. A nurse near the front snorted so loudly she had to cover her mouth. Whispering erupted across the room, sharp and merciless. Linda shot to her feet, her face drained of all color. Tom, how could you? This is a private matter. Integrity, I said softly, is never private. Her voice cracked. You're ruining my reputation. I raised an eyebrow. I'm not the one who kissed a doctor while telling my husband I was stuck late at work. A ripple of shocked laughter burst from one of the back tables. Someone whispered, good for him. Keller ran a hand through his hair, panicked. Linda, you told me. Oh, don't you dare start, she snapped, turning on him. You said we were careful. A couple of nurses exchanged delighted looks, one whispering, careful my butt. The director cleared his throat, clearly mortified. We need to postpone the candidate evaluation, effective immediately. Linda swayed where she stood, eyes darting around the room, searching desperately for somewhere to hide someone, to blame someone to save her. But there was no one. Not anymore. I didn't stay for the fallout. I turned and walked out with the same steady calm I'd carried in. As I reached the exit, a few staff members nodded at me. Not pity, not judgment. Respect. Outside, the night air hit my face, cold, sharp, honest. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, breathed in deeply, and felt something unclench inside my chest for the first time since that night in the restaurant. I didn't shout, I didn't fight, I didn't break. I simply told the truth where it mattered most. The morning after the promotion, dinner felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, not triumphant, just quiet, like the world had shifted a few inches to the left overnight, and I was still figuring out how to stand in it. Linda didn't come home. I wasn't surprised. Shame has a way of driving people into the shadows, and she had a whole ballroom of witnesses to hide from. I made myself coffee in the kitchen Folgers, the same way she used to, but the smell didn't sting the way I thought it would. It felt familiar, steady mine again. By noon, the fallout began. Her boss called. Then HR. Then one of her coworkers, a woman named Jill, who had always been kind to both of us. We're all shocked, she said gently over the phone. I'm sorry, Tom. And, well, people talk. Keller's in trouble, and your wife, she won't be getting that promotion or anything close to it. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel guilty either. I felt done. Linda texted around 2 in the afternoon. I need time. Please don't throw everything away. I stared at the message for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't owe her a reply, not yet, maybe not ever. 3 days later, she finally came home to pack a suitcase. She looked smaller somehow, eyes, puffy shoulders, slumped hair unkempt. The navy dress from the dinner was gone. She wore an old sweatshirt and clutched a tissue in her hand, like a lifeline. We stood in the doorway of the bedroom, the air thick with everything unsaid. Tom, she whispered, I never meant for it to go this far. I nodded. Most people don't until it does. She wiped her eyes. Can't we fix this? No, I said softly. Because you didn't break something small, Linda. You broke the foundation, and you started building a new one with someone else before you ever told me ours was cracking. She sobbed then, but it wasn't my job to hold her up anymore. A week later, she moved into a small apartment near downtown. And a month after that, our divorce began. It wasn't drawn out or violent, not with the evidence I had. Iowa's equitable distribution suddenly leaned heavily in my favor. I kept the house, my truck, most of my retirement, and the savings she hadn't siphoned off. She got her apartment a car, and whatever dignity she hadn't already spent on a man who'd stopped returning her calls before the ink on the HR report dried. As for Keller, he transferred to another hospital. Quietly, quickly. The official word was reassigned to a different facility, but everyone in Cedar Rapids knew what that really meant. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Not every night and not all the way through, but enough to feel human again. The house, though quiet and empty, didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like mine. The walls weren't reminders of betrayal, they were reminders of survival. I started volunteering more at VFW Post 788, fixing old vents, cleaning the furnace, helping the older vets who couldn't get around well. Most of the guys didn't ask about the divorce, and I didn't volunteer details. But one night after a poker game, a Vietnam vet named Kenny patted my shoulder and said, "You handled it like a man oughta. Quiet, clean, no fireworks, just truth." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. Life didn't magically become rainbows and roses, but it became steadier, quieter in a good way. I learned to enjoy cooking simple meals again. I learned that being alone at a kitchen table was different from being lonely. I learned that the quiet of my own home wasn't something to fear, it was something to rebuild from. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I saw her. Not Linda. A woman from St. Mark's, her name was Margaret, though everyone called her Maggie. She was widowed 5 years earlier. She found me after service one Sunday holding a small foil-wrapped package. "I baked banana bread," she said shyly. "Your brother told me you've had a rough year." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pity. It was kindness, the kind people give without expecting anything in return. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. A real one. Not bitter, not forced. Just human. We talked a while on the church steps. Nothing heavy, nothing fast. Just two people standing in the March sunshine, finding comfort in small conversation. When she left, she touched my arm lightly and said, "You know, dignity looks good on you." I thought about that for the rest of the day. Because she was right. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't destroy anyone's property. I didn't lose myself trying to hold together a life someone else had already walked out of emotionally. I sought truth. I sought justice. And I walked away with my dignity intact. Not everybody gets that chance. Now, months later, I find myself making coffee in the morning black, same old Folgers, and smiling at the quiet instead of fearing it. I walk through my house without flinching. I drive past Old Mill Steakhouse without feeling my stomach knot. I sit at VFW on Fridays and play poker with men who know the weight of silence and the value of self-respect. And sometimes when I'm lucky, there's a fresh loaf of banana bread waiting in a foil-wrapped tin on my porch. Maybe it's from Maggie. Maybe it's a nudge from the universe. Either way, it feels like a beginning. If you're listening to this and you've been where I've been, whether you've lived through betrayal or heartbreak or the quiet kind of suffering you don't tell anyone about, I want you to hear this. You're not alone, and you're not broken. And whatever dignity you think you've lost, you can get it back, one quiet, honest step at a time. If my story meant something to you or reminded you of your own strength, I'd be grateful if you'd stay with us for another story next week. Another tale of grit, justice, and the resilience folks our age know all too well. Take care of yourselves out there and protect your dignity.